Greetings, Islam. Today we're going to talk about uh, how they disguising Moorish history as Black history, African American history, and Indian genocide, and also European history. You say mixing between Europeans and Africans and the Portuguese Empire produced hierarchical categories for racial gradations during the 17th century. So they're giving you a timeline. This is a uh, what they call peer review historical paper. So when we read these as Moors, we know we're coming from a Christian point of view, but they give you a lot of sources, so that's good. You say only in this period were the categories mulatto and pardo included in the regulations for purity of blood. Estatutos de pureza de sangue. And only in this period because this is the period of conquest coming from the fraction of the Moorish Empire and the wars between Moors and Christians. So you say, which determined who could have access to the same honors and privileges that the old Christian Portuguese received. For the 17th century onward, those regulations stipulated that no one of the race of Jew, Moor, or mulatto was eligible to receive certain honors and privileges from the crown. So we're gonna see why. We're gonna see why these Jews and Moors dissipate out of American history all of a sudden, and pretos, pardos, mulattoes, Indians, blacks, Africans, and all these other terms start to show up out of the blue. The war against the Moors frequently involved taking captives and enslaving prisoners of war. This happened on both sides, sometimes accompanied by elaborate negotiation over ransom payments. So that's what we've been talking about. In most of our history, we're dealing with the truth of the matter, not a Hollywood version. We're dealing with the exact details of what happened. So you're having Christians and you're having Moors being captive and ransom, which we see today. Um, what we call arrest and bail. See, at the same time, it was stimulated the participation of European merchants in the prosperous slave markets of North Africa in 1455. So we know in 1455 from our videos, the North Africa we're talking about is in America. So we're talking about in the case of Portugal, we're talking about the two Marpequinas. The Marpequina that we call the Gulf of Mexico today, and the Marpequina that we call the Caribbean. In 1455, the papal bull Romanus Pontifex justified the commerce in slaves and their introduction into Christian Europe by the Portuguese crown in the name of possible conversion and evangelization of the African pagans. And you remember they call Indians the same thing. So when we read this, keep in mind we're talking about South America and parts of North America, the Gulf states. which is the South, considered the charter of Portuguese imperialism. The bull conceded to the King of Portugal free and ample faculty to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans, whoever whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ, whoever placed and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominion, possessions, all movable and immovable goods, whatever held and possessed by them, and to reduce their person to perpetual slavery. So it was basically the bow of the crusade on Island Mar, which is beyond the sea, and basically both sides of it, the west coast of Africa and the east coast of America, been the first steps, first crossing, until they get to the Cabo Border, which is the South America, I mean Central America area, the Yucatan, up up into the Gulf of Mexico, down through Florida, back through the islands, back to Portugal, 1400s. And we deal with Henry the Navigator and them. In the time of the government of Castile, go to the person who marries his daughter, Donna Guimar. Guimar. This remind me of Guinea and Alan Mar. So we're talking about Henrique Diaz. We're gonna see him later. And a couple more characters they're gonna mention. And that for his two daughters, Your Majesty also award the favor of the two knighthoods for the person who marries them, which figure they easily find honored soldiers who will marry them. So he only had daughters, he didn't have a son, so he his woe requested that his honorifics that he earned would go down to the husbands of his daughters. For himself, he requested 200,000 rays of income to support himself and to be able to serve while he can. And since he has no son, in which your memory is perpetuated, let your majesty award the favor of title of nobility to the husband of his daughters, and that although such generous favors owe more to greatness of your majesty than his reward that he could expect, just with respect to what he has done to other persons that were not so continuous in the war, nor has such good success in it as Enrique Diaz had. So let's look at Enrique Diaz before we move on. Enrique Diaz. This one right here too. Let me see. This right here. And you see, Afro-Brazilian also one of those terms that he loses birthright, basically of Moorish American, and became foreign to his own land. As Afro implies that he was captured in Africa and brought to Brazil. When they don't have no receipt, there is no consensus among historians whether he was born free or captive. So they just assuming that based off his complexion, he's an Afro-Brazilian. So they get to write your story for you and write their own story for their own children, but they get to write your story for you too. Remember that now, okay? And you're dealing with these orders of Christ back then and now. So even governor of the blacks in 1636. and then he ended up being governor of all Creoles, blacks, and mulattoes. So you can see the conquistadors of Portugal, Order of Christ, figuring out how to govern their colonies, and they use terms like governor of the blacks and stuff like that. When the whole time we're gonna see how that's the same stories that we got on the peninsula dealing with Moors and Christians and their battles. Same stories on this side and in Africa and the West Coast mostly. Let's continue. Then we come back to that. So governor of the blacks or the Negroes. So we try to tell you Negroes and black is the same word, same exact word. You just dealing with Spanish with Negro and black. You just translate it to English. You ain't changed the word whatsoever. Okay. I see a lot of people who use the term black as if that's our name nationally, internationally, or whatever, complexion. And at the same time, when they're angry or they hate somebody, they change that black to Negro. All they doing is changing the language. They ain't changing that word. They still calling them black. It's ridiculous. Anyway, appeared to be well advised in his visit to the court, despite the opposition from the Procurador de Fazenda, the attorney of the finance ministry, and some discussion about the value of pension. And the reason why the modern scholars can't figure it out, but the reason why we know that he had been well advised, he had know what he been doing because he is the old Christians. He is the old Portuguese from the old Andalus days before he been in Portugal. So, and almost all his demands was considered favorable by the council, who was granted by the Queen de Luisa de Guzman. We're gonna see her later, including the pension he had requested for himself and the titles of nobility for his sons-in-law. Now we see in our older videos the Guzman have Moorish American vassals as the Khan of Niebla. They're willing to deal with him to get these products out, get this money, whatever they've been doing. But we can see that's of the family of the Guzman right there in his story too. And she been favorable to him. And including the pension he had requested for himself and the titles of nobility for his sons-in-laws. In fact, it's not personally accepted and not personally accepted the decorations and knighthoods of the military order. Enrique Diaz, and we see this still going on today. Go look at your modern day rulers, presidents, people in high government positions in South America and Africa. They look just like you and me, but they got these orders, they got these decorations and knighthoods still to this day. Not really changed. So Enrique Diaz exempted himself and the Mesa de Consiglia a ordinance from the need to investigate the restriction regarding his parents and grandparents. So they now get into the color thing with them. According to the opinion issued by the council and confirmed by the royal decree of June 6, 1657, the decorations of Soरे passed to his son-in-law Pedro de Val de Vezo, and the Knight of Christ were reserved for the marriage of his daughter, de Guimar. So they gave it to them. It was also determined that upon the marriage of another two daughters with soldiers who have services, according to the summary of the inventory of decrees, potarias, of the kingdom, or with soldiers of quality in service, according to the approved opinion of the council, they will each receive a knighthood of San Bento de Aguas or Santiago. So basically, we're gonna see later about Saint Benedict. And this way, the need for inquiries and duties were transferred to the son-in-laws, who would have to bear the burden of the restriction placed on the father-in-law, but who will also benefit from many services. A socially and racially mixed marriage with the daughters of Enrique Diaz would thus determine the possibility of confirmation of the transferring of the favors that presupposed their marriage with men of quality and services. So it started to become a thing of either you will convert, well, conversion been something they've been doing to prevent the stigmas that been being put on them under the term Moor, Jew, and mulatto. Basically trying to keep property, trying to keep titles. The Benta Henriquez, I guess that's his daughter, however, married Amaro Cardigo, so she married Amor herself, captain of the Terco de Genta Preta, so of the Preta race, so-called Prietos, and son of the freed slaves and grandson of slaves from Angola. In the order which had turned down the appeal he presented to solicit his introduction into the Order of Santiago. So she going in herself, going to marry somebody just dark skin like her. And so that put a wrench in the story for them, because they don't see how Amaro Cardigo still get his free status at that time. That's Brazil. And you gotta remember, Angola is a translation from a term like Congo that they've been translating and they've been putting it all in West Africa, but we got a lot of Angolas and Congos on this side. So in the order which he had turned down the appeal he presented to solicit his induction into the Order of Santiago, a condition for the fulfillment of favor received as son-in-law of Henrique Diaz, the old mestre de campo, master of the camp. So by marrying Benta, he got received what they owe to the son-in-law. So Amaro Cardigo is described as a black man born in the Capitina of Pernambuco, which the record probably say negro, and they translate to black, the people who write in this piece right here. On 23rd September 1711, at any rate, there was the demand that no individual of the Jewish or of the new Christian race could receive a knighthood in the military orders, no matter how remote the stain of blood was. So you see, they playing with Amaro Cardigo, saying he's a Jew or a new Christian. But as you can see, a lot of them couldn't get their titles or whatever under the new regime that they once had in Brazil. This meant taking into account hints and rumors going back beyond 3 generations, while for the other converts it was enough to prove Christian heritage up to 4 generations. The statutes of the order especially prohibited being the son or grandson of pagans. In this sense, a preto could be an old Christian, So they were saying somebody with dark skin, they could have proved that they've been one of the converted Moors from back in the day. When Portugal first started with the kingdoms of Morocco and Fez in Brazil. They can prove they've been in service of the order of Christ at that time, then they would have get their old Christian status. New Christians means those blacks that they just converted, which began to mark as African slaves. According to Dutra, 1999, in the 16th century, at least two African Negroes, see how they use terms like that, Luis Perez, a nobleman from the house of the king of the Congo, and look at his name, Luis Perez. That's like a Latino American, right? And Don Pedro de Silva, a noble knight of the royal house, a black man, Negro, and ambassador of the king of Angola. And both received knighthood of the Order of Santiago. You know, we talk about Santiago. Santiago is a war cry of the Christians, like they say the Moors war cry of Muhammad, and their war cry of Santiago, St. James. The same was true for a range of American Indians converted for more than a generation of Catholicism and belonging to the families of the leaders of the group of origin, graceful decoration from the military order. So what they find is the so-called American Indians, well, basically what they call the natives today, still got that same history too. Some Muslims call them Latinos and Hispanics, but they got both. They've been doing it to both more. They've been doing it to Moors and the other American natives who've been here. So later on in history, they started to see that these things still existed. From the old walls, the old holy walls. And like I said, you had Moors over here who been on the sides of Spain and Portugal, and who been on the side of Sharif, of the kings of the Moors of Morocco and Spain and Fez in America. A lot of mixed walls. Incorporation of new waves of African foreigners, slave purchase and Atlantic slave trade, and also of indigenous peoples brought to the settlement by slaving expeditions or enslaved by the colonists, supposedly through resgate. You know, we talk about that as rescues. These places that they mark as rescues, where they take things that they steal and plunder to board the ship to go back to Spain or wherever they've been going. And we talk about the slave expeditions from the Banderans in the last video. That's what they're talking about. So supposedly through resgate, liberation from pagan captivity. So basically they've been calling themselves freeing slaves from, well, more like of one group or tribe would capture another tribe. Portuguese or Spain would take that opportunity to go rescue those captives in order to and later just to re-enslave them practically. Let's say, or quote unquote just war, and that's what these so-called conquests they're talking about, which with a lot of them with vassalage and capitulations. To continue the continuous incorporation of foreigners as slaves or settled Indians took on a structural character for the society that was forming in Portuguese America. In this process, the Brazilian colony took on a distinct character within the empire as a colonial and slave-based society with its particular social hierarchies and classifications. And Castillo had a similar version in the Spanish. also the Sharif had their own version of the way they classify and ran their places. They ain't been too much. They ain't been all lands over here ran by one of these three empires at one point: Spain, Portugal, and Morocco. And that's what we seeing. They seeing that too. They seeing these people being decorated under these different titles and shit. And they in America, been in America. So we gotta remember our story show that we dealing with the Punic Wars, Rome and Carthage battling in America. This before this in BC. So we already dealing with this story in the ancient times. So it's shocking to us seeing it show up in 14 and 1300s when we starting to see the language that we can get to, documents that we can get to from that time period, 1300, 1200. We'll see when we get to the timeline. I'm going to start the timeline at early 1300s, but now I got to go back to 1120 something. That's how much information I'm starting to find that dealing with the America. So in this process, the identity of the non-European free population migrated towards the figure of the Pardo. So that's what most of them starting to claim to be. This phenomenon will refine the process of racialization in the mode of the old regime of social hierarchies among the free colonial population. After the legal prohibition of enslavement of the indigenous population, the Pardo denomination would more often be linked to an African descent. So basically, they've been using the term Paro to claim to be free and indigenous, keep their rights. After Domingos Rodriguez Carneiro, one of the masters of the camp, they call them field commanders, who succeeded Henrique Diaz, is cited as a Pardo. So even after Henrique Diaz died, still Moors running the shit under the Christian mode. In a report in 1757 of the Palmeiras campaign, so the Palmeiras was also Moors. So you got Moors of Portugal Empire fighting against those Moors who they call Quilambos. It was a quote unquote black man, son and nephew of blacks born in Angola, according to Cardraio, the letter that conceded to him a royal pension of 18,000 reais. So they paying them boy for their service. But you got stories of African conquistadors attacking America with these conquistadors of Spain and Portugal. And that's not necessarily the case. Even though that could be the case, we're dealing with a huge history here. We're dealing with a lot of different events. But a lot of times they lost in translation. They translate terms to mean Angola in English. When they are placed in the language of the Portuguese, they translate that from might be sitting in Brazil, which would make sense. That Carta Pradral later might have been talking about Angola and Brazil. The growing presence of the increasingly important stratum of descendants of African slaves freed some generations before required the inventions of particular, you see, they assuming these are descendants of African slaves freed generations before because they finding them free in 1600s and 1800s and 1700s. They finding them free already in Brazil, free and getting decorated and paid and rich. So they can't fathom in their head because these people dark skinned how that is possible. So they say things like descendants of African slave freed. required the invention of particular forms of classification to differentiate them from the free population of all Christians and from slaves and those recently freed. See, they don't know shit. None of this was, however, clearly defined at the end of the 17th century. See, they know it's not clearly defined, but they think they got it clear. In an article published in the journal Past and Present, Richard Gray presents the fascinating character of Lourenço de Silva de Mendoza, another one. In 1682, Lorenzo, well, that's basically Lorenzo, introduced himself in Rome with recommendation from Madrid and Lisbon. So he getting recommendation from nobles in Madrid and Lisbon in 1682 and going into Rome, which identify him as a Moreno born in Brazil and a Pardo man born in this kingdom of Portugal, respectively. That's why it's good to get the old records and see what they actually say about him themselves. They could have said Moros, and these people gonna translate everything how they want to. His Portuguese letter of recommendation, signed by the papal clerk Gaspar de Costa Mesquista, which means moss probably, and Lisbon in 1681. Declared him the leading representative of all Pardos in this kingdom. So here you go, another king of the blacks to them, in Castillo and in Brazil. He was also recommendations from Madrid signed by Giacinto Regio Monzon in 23 September 1680. Two, that declared him to be the general representative of the influential Brotherhood of Pretos. So you got the Brotherhood of the Negritos in Seville. You got the Brotherhood of the Pretos in Madrid. In this position, he was authorized to establish new branches of the Brotherhood in any Christian city or place. So he going around creating these brotherhoods. Together with those two letters of recommendation affidavits, he sent two petitions to Pope Innocent the Ninth or the 11th. In the first, he represented himself as Lorenzo da Silva Mendoza of royal descent from the kings of Congo and Angola, permanent representative of the Congregation of Negroes and Pardos of Our Lady of the Rosary. So, a very high education. So, of course, we know Our Lady of the Rosary is in Brazil, the church. And I think he called something about the Negroes of Our Lady of the Rosary Church. See, arguing against perpetual slavery of Christian Negroes and their descendants by white masters. For Lorenzo, this diabolical abuse of the institution of slavery, to which he systematically added a further description of tortures and abuses to which the slave was subjugated, had led many slaves in desperations and infanticide and suicide. He thus requested a papal condemnation of this practice on pain of excommunication for those white Christians persisted in it. But the problem was that he been getting out of his own world and going into the European gardens instead of his home country, which been Morocco. And him being Moors. But you can see a lot of the history gonna get whitewashed and lost in time, especially being with their names Lorenzo de Silva, stuff like that. You're gonna hear about Lorenzo de Mendoza and stuff like that in Black History Month because that don't fit. Say who so they say those who were born to Christian parents in Brazil and the city of Lisbon, since white Christians had received from the Pope in the distance past a papal brief to convert the Negroes to the Catholic faith. So they're talking about when they've been Moors, they've been already done get those from Rome, those mandates to do these things to them. And that's what Mendoza don't really know because he been born into the baptism like we today. So he says, since white Christians had received from the Pope in the distant past a papal brief to convert the Negroes to the Catholic faith and take them as slaves during this period, he argued that the authorization should not be one for perpetual slavery that extends to their children and their children's children already born in the bosom of Christianity and deserving the sacrament of baptisms. So his argument is they already not been converted, leave them alone. Stop kidnapping them again and doing the same things that you already did if they already have been seen to be in that state. Well, that was his argument. So the surprising story of Di Lorenzo tell us much about the turbulent 17th century period when the social categories and specific hierarchies of the new order emerging on the other side of the Atlantic were in the process of change. And each of his letters of recommendation, Lorenzo was described differently. In the letter received from Lisbon, he appeared as a Pardo man born in this kingdom of Portugal, which leads Gray, 1997, and Lahore, 2001, to consider him a mulatto. In fact, according to Vocabulario Portuguese and Latino, 1712, the term pardo is defined as a color between white and black characteristic of the pardo. So I was saying that they've been listed on the slave document in the 1400s. They've been saying Moors and parrots. You know, saying Negroes and parrots on the cargo ships. Cause you gotta remember we ain't got the term Latino, Hispanic, light skin, and all that in those times. So the Portuguese version is Pardo, from where the name appears to have come. Pardo man, see mulatto. In the Spanish letter of introduction, however, he is identified as a Moreno, born in Brazil. And that's another way they used to separate the different complexions. Kind of lighter skin, Moreno, and darker skin, Negro, which in the Spanish language, predominantly in the 17th century Spanish America, referred to a black man. The most interesting definition, however, is that which he used to describe in the petition of royal descent from the King of Congo and Angola. So they confused by that too. This claim of royal origin is not impossible, since the members of the noble family of the Kingdom of Congo and the various kingdoms that subsequently formed the colony of Angola were enslaved in the wars that devastated the region in the 17th century. In this context, some were simply exiled as free persons to Portuguese America. So they trying 2002, they trying to explain these things. But we know from dealing with the Portuguese, the kingdoms of Congo and Angola been on both sides in their mind. And this Lorenzo, he knew that at that time too. So although described as having been born in the kingdom of Portugal in the Portuguese letter of introduction, the reference to Brazil in the Spanish document, and the request for help with the cost of returning to his house in the Indies in 1686. So the document's talking about him being in America, for sure. But it also showing that Devon, also known as Africa at that time, and it confusing modern day scholars as usual. But it don't confuse us. In 1686 appears to leave no doubt that he was born in Brazil. and his path in that turbulent second half of the 17th century, as well as those of Enrique Diaz and Amaro Cardigo, reveals the emergence of a new elite of Puerto Pardo man who was surprising connections throughout the empire. So they had connections throughout the world, and even from America. That's been going on for a long time. It poses the question of the conditions that enabled him to find his place in this new world. It also shed a light on the moment in time in which, in terms of identity, Pardos and Pretos, Africans and their descendants in America were all lumped together as descendants of Africans, as thus probably of as slaves as well. So you see, basically give you a synopsis why you always saying you got other people tell you a story, they're gonna lump it all in one, even though individuals got different routes and stories and histories. Like right now, not all are sitting on death row, but you got some else on death row. So 100 years from now, somebody writing a book and saying black people been in prisoners in North America as if we all been in prison. Some of us never have, never will. Live and die never will, but the history gonna tell a different story later when they jumble it all up in one based off the plight of some. Lorenzo petitions and the attention they received from the papacy demonstrate the uncertainties that still existed in the theological discussions about conditions of slavery in the heart of Christianity. So basically, what they're saying is a lot. If you go get the details of the history, you're gonna find a whole lot of different situations that might be anomalies based off the reconstructed, popularized version of history. You're gonna find many anomalies like Lorenzo. He is a anomaly to them, as described by Alan Castro in the year 2000 in analyzing the position of the Jesuits in the religious battle over slave traffic in the 17th century. The expansion of the black slave trade in Africa financed not only the emergence of the modern slave economy in the Atlantic, but also the expansion of the Catholic faith in the Americas, because they are all both in one. In fact, it proved impossible to separate the two processes. Throughout the Portuguese Empire, following traditions of Roman legislation, children born to slave women remained slave, and even when freed, ex-slaves remained tied to their ex-masters who retained the power to revoke the freedom conceded by alleging ingratitude. Only those who had never been slaves could be considered fully free subject of His Majesty. Descendants of free slaves would be barred from, for at least 4 generations, for holding any high government or religious positions, as well as from the honor reserved for all Christians who did not have Rasa. So at the same, they've been putting a lot of these people in caste systems, but at the same time, you still have free Moors running around that same place. They just ain't registered them because they ain't been a part of the kingdom. They didn't even foot. So in Portugal, and especially in the Brazilian colonies, the formation with no race of Moor, Jew, or mulatto became common in countless documents produced. So they say that's why I've been trying to say the indigenous people of Brazil are the Moors. They got countless documents showing that they had to get rid of that status in order to survive based off those wars against those Moors. But the end that they die is change your whole history with a pain. They cost you with a pain. They make you not use those terms. You better call yourself an Indian. Shoot you in your head with this musket. It is important to note, furthermore, that the words Preto or Negro were closely associated with the experience of slavery. So you see, coming in from Moor into the Christian kingdom, now you're getting listed as Negro, which now associates you with the slavery stuff, regardless if you was or not. and were not even used in this context in this type of legislation, especially in the colonial context. So basically, they tell you in reality, there's a war between Moors and Christians. Once we not baptize you, now the Negro and all that other stuff coming in. In the same period, another type of legislation addressed the role of this population with another type of racial language, the Pragmatica of 1749. So you see, as time go by, it getting worse and worse for them. Analyzed by Lara, prohibited Negroes and mulattoes from the conquistas, the colonies, from using certain type of clothes and symbols of distinction because their process and expectation of social advancement threatened the social order. There were no distinction made between free persons or slaves. However, they were considered free pardos or mulattoes every time there was an effort to prevent them from occupying, as they in fact did, government positions and other specific posts in the world of the colonial order. So they've been trying their best to keep them down in any place out of any positions of rulership using their race, now bringing in the race thing. But they suffered this based off their old capitulations to these Portuguese. He stressed in Portuguese America, where the white Europeans tended to occupy the principal position of wealth and status, the boundaries between Pardo, Pretos, and Brancos always implied a social continuum between slavery and liberty, as well as a cultural continuum between Africans and Portuguese. And in Portugal, despite the persistence of slavery until the second half of the 18th century, mulattoes and pardos did not identify themselves as being of a Pacific mixed origin of the Brotherhood of Lisbon. According to Lahorn, information about the existence of pardo and mulatto in the Portuguese brotherhoods are so rare that one could imagine that they did not exist. And this was not because the concept did not exist. It because they know the ones who've been in the brotherhoods of Lisbon, they know they basically call themselves Jews. The Moors who've been in the brotherhood of Lisbon. So that's why they can't find those records of pardos and mulattoes, because even though they might have been setting up this caste systems, they haven't called themselves that. So they're saying basically it might seem like they didn't exist in it, but they find a record that they've been in it. And this was not because the concept did not exist. Many of the brotherhoods of Negroes imposed restrictions of access of mulattoes to their principal office, and elite brotherhoods imposed restriction of purity of blood that increased affected mulattoes from the 17th century onward. So you can see even in their brotherhoods, they've been being racial thing against their own brothers who've been, I guess, too light. Sort of reverse. So let's run the pretos and pardos between the cross and the saw racial categories in the 17th century Brazil by Hebe Matos. So just so-called different drawings of Moors they find in Brazil. And I wanted to show how they use a lot of the gold jewelry. They're from the gold mines of Minas. Fine silk. You can see some Moors in the Order of Christ. And this ain't even Portugal one, it's a Teutonic Knight, a Templar. Just to give you an idea of what we're dealing with. Let's go on to, before we finish, let's go look at some of these characters. We got Don Arobe, which means noble, like Arab. We can see them in the West, the Inca noblemen, Don Arobe, which I believe is the Dukes of Sassany. I realize we're dealing with this on both sides of the Atlantic, dealing with Rome. When they say Lorenzo going to Rome, he could have just gone to the jurisdiction of Rome and Brazil. So you can go to Spain, you can go to Austria, you can go to Saxony, all in America if you go to the right house. But the area where they say they from, they claim, is the Esmeraldas, which means emeralds, which we know from our research is the land of the Alcazares to the Moors and the old days. Later came Esmeraldas when all that was Inca Empire. They call it Quito Empire sometimes. So we see the Order of Christ symbol in Lisbon to show you the Brotherhood of Lisbon still out there. Still been out there. This is 1570, so we can see where Lorenzo and all them coming from. Let me see, they put the parrot in there, introducing the parrot. This is symbolism. You see the parrot a lot. And watch for these right here too. When you see these Europeans with the feather, with the three feather plumes, that means they could be from America too. This could be a scene in America with the parrot and the plumes on this guy. Could be the Mamluco, not a Castellano. They always dressed as pirates, like Barbosa or the Turkish. So you see the Order of Santiago, that's what it is. The Order of Santiago cross. And we got this Antonio Moro. We can see that word Moro being used in the Spanish. The Portuguese version is Moro. Just means more. Also does the Spanish Antonio, Spanish version. We see another version, Adonis, more. And they also use that to mean commander, the one who gives commands, or Lord. Ignorant people came later to define this term as black, meaning black or dark. The reason why, because the people who were called this wore that to them, to those Christians who write those in their dictionaries. So they got Luis de Guzman, who give all the favor to Henry Diaz. Well, funny about her, she got them Afro pops now. Somebody help me understand how she got them Afro pops. See, she got them Afro pops. Luis de Guzman. Enrique Diaz. I mean, even the certain groups in Lisbon were trying to say he didn't deserve those decorations and his titles, I guess because he's dark skinned, and she stand up for him and gave them to him and his heirs. It's another example of how they call him a Native American, but the name Cameroon or Cimarron showed that even they began called Moors and converted, decorated, and history reconstructed. So we got Felipe Cameron just like him. They both from Brazil, and they both getting the same thing. You see the Rekife. We talk about the rescues, and you see you get Capital Moore, the head lord of the Indians of Brazil. His title, his title, king of the blacks and the Creoles and the mulattoes, and you can rule over your Indians, brother. You see, they all indigenous too, but they both here when the Portuguese came. They already both here like this. That's why we tell Moors who they say they call you Hispanic or Latino too. You most likely but the more you get flip up to, just like Felipe. They always get the term Felipe. Remember that all these Moors who get converted by Portugal, they had high enough status that they get that Felipe. So and they re-educate you at Saint Benedictimo. You gotta either say Benedict or say Benedictimo near every hood in America to show you that these missionaries been against Moors. In the old records, regardless of what they tell you in the next records and the later records. So basically, you got Danny the same record as Felipe, Cameroon. You got the same name as main man. They're just different versions. That's the version that Carlos the Fifth called the Moors of America, Cameroons. That's the Portuguese version right there of that same word. So we go right Kifi to the Duchess Mariestad, which they say is the land of Maurice, but we know Mari is Moors, and the suffix mean land of. So this basically is Mauritania. Okay, start right there, and we'll continue the next.